The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the Yosemite cliffs in molten gold, and the boys' laughter cut through the still air like wind over granite. I could feel it vibrating in my chest, an uncontainable rhythm that made my own heart race, a reminder of something too bright to hold on to. He sprinted ahead of me, boots scuffing loose stones, and then paused, arms flung wide as if he could touch the sky itself. His hair caught the light, a halo of careless gold, and I called after him, but he didn't turn. He never did. I should have seen it then, the way the shadows clung too tightly to the trees, how the quiet stretched like a held breath between one laugh and the next. I remember kneeling to tie my own laces, fumbling with the double knot, and when I looked up he was gone. Not around a bend, not behind a boulder, just gone. The wind whispered through the pines in a cadence that felt like warning. I called his name, louder this time, my voice breaking over the rocks, but only the echo returned, a thin, trembling ghost. My stomach knotted, my chest squeezed, and I began running, stumbling over roots, scraping my palms along bark, following a path that no longer existed. Every crack in the dirt, every swaying branch seemed like a signal, a message I could not read. I could feel him somewhere just beyond my reach, a heartbeat in the shadow of a cliff, a flicker in the corner of my eye. His energy lingered in the air, the scent of pine, resin, and sweat, the faint tang of fear mixed with exhilaration. I remembered the way he had held my hand that morning, insisting I climb the smaller ridge with him, insisting we race to see who could touch the first bird in the sky. His persistence, his joy, now haunted me, every memory sharp as broken glass. I stopped at the edge of a clearing, chest heaving, sweat stinging my eyes, and saw the faint trace of a footprint pressed into soft soil, a boot too small to belong to anyone else. I followed it, reckless, desperate, as the wind picked up and the sky turned a bruised shade of purple. Shadows stretched, twisted, folding over themselves in ways that made the trees look taller, angrier, alive. Somewhere above me, a hawk circled, silent and sharp, its eyes catching every movement as though it knew what I could not. The trail led me deeper into a canyon where the air smelled damp, earthy, heavy with moss and stone. My voice cracked again, calling his name into the growing dark. The echoes returned differently now, distorted, cruel, and I began to question if they were echoes at all or the first whispers of something waiting. I saw the rocks ahead glimmer with the last light, and there nothing. Only an empty space where his presence had been, and I stood frozen, gripping a jagged stone for balance. My thoughts scrambled, a jumble of guilt, disbelief, and terror. I replayed every second of the day. How he had grinned at me as we crossed a stream, how he had balanced on a fallen log, arms outstretched like wings, how I had laughed at him, telling him not to fall. And now the laughter was gone, leaving only a silence so deep it felt like it could swallow me whole. I crouched, scanning the ground for any sign, a dropped glove, a flattened patch of grass, a broken twig. My fingers trembled over dirt, tracing shapes that could have been clues but were nothing. The wind shifted, carrying a faint, almost imperceptible sound, a gasp maybe, a sigh, a fleeting whisper. My pulse shot up, every muscle taut, every nerve singing with the panic of knowing something had happened, and I was too late to stop it. I called him again, the sound of my own voice foreign, urgent, futile. The canyon seemed to stretch farther than it should, the light dimming, swallowing the path behind me, as though the world itself was conspiring to erase him. Then I froze, certain I heard the faintest rustle, a brush against a tree far too deliberate to be wind, far too close to be coincidence. My hands shook, my legs unsteady, and I swallowed hard, tasting the copper tang of fear on my tongue. He had been here, he had been alive just moments ago, and now he wasn't. The sky cracked with the last of daylight, the cliffs catching fire for a heartbeat, and in that brief, blazing moment I thought I saw him, a shadow moving behind the trees, just beyond reach, just out of focus. I reached, called, stumbled, but nothing responded except the echo of what could have been his laughter, twisting cruelly in the wind. And the forest swallowed the sound like it had never existed at all. The search began in the early hours, when the first pale light draped over the valley like a thin veil, and every figure moving through the trees carried the weight of hope and dread in equal measure. Rangers, volunteers, family, all converging with flashlights, radios, and whispered prayers. I moved among them, every nerve fraying, my boots crushing brittle leaves, and each sound seemed amplified. A snapping branch, a distant bird call, the rasp of someone breathing too close. My throat was raw from calling his name before the sun rose, and yet I couldn't stop. Every second stretched, every shadow shifted, teasing my mind with possibility and horror. His mother, her eyes hollow and red-rimmed, kept running her hands over the straps of her backpack as if it contained some magical key to his return. I saw her catch herself in the reflection of a shallow stream, fingers tightening, lips trembling, and she muttered under her breath, "Come back. Please come back." Each word made the air heavier, the canyon narrower, pressing all of us into a collective ache. I wanted to reach for her, to hold her, to say that I was just as lost, just as desperate, but the words lodged somewhere between my stomach and my throat, suffocating before they could form. We moved along trails he had loved, the ones where he had skipped stones and named the patterns of clouds, calling them dragons or castles. Every detail of our previous walks now felt cruelly ironic. The smooth bark he had pressed his palm against, the mossy ledges where he had perched and watched the river coil below. I imagined him standing there, smiling, and the idea of that innocence lost tore at me with jagged edges. I imagined him too, somewhere, scared and cold, pressing himself against rocks to hide, and that image made my chest feel as though it had been compressed by the weight of granite. Rangers spoke in low, clipped tones, scanning with trained eyes, pointing out subtle tracks, disturbed underbrush, or flattened grasses. "Could be him. Could be anything," one said, voice tight. Every suggestion made my stomach twist, every possibility a knife turning. A small clue, a backpack strap caught on a branch, a boot print half washed by rain, ignited hope, but it always dissolved into doubt, like smoke slipping through my fingers. I ran my hands over the bark, over the stones, trying to feel what he had felt, trying to imagine where he might have gone. The forest felt larger, older, somehow indifferent to our panic. At night I lay in the tent, the canvas thin against the cold that slipped in like water. The boy's laughter haunted the corners of my mind, looping between memory and longing. I could see him in every shadow, hear his voice in the wind, a whisper carried across the valley. Each imagined sound made my heart race. Each imagined sight made me hope, and each hope burned like fire that could not warm. Sleep was a betrayal, a fragile deception, and I counted hours in my head, wondering how long he could have survived, what he must have felt, whether he thought of me as I thought of him. Rumors began to circulate among the searchers. Glimpses of a small figure darting across ridges, eyes in the dark that vanished when approached, a lonely howl echoing through the canyon at odd hours. I chased each one, running over rocks slick with dew, scrambling up slopes slick with moss, only to find empty space and the faint scent of pine and earth. Each false lead tightened the coil of fear in my chest. I began to question everything. The paths we had taken, the choices I had made that day, the moments I had laughed when he had begged me to wait, to notice something I hadn't. Guilt became a living thing, crawling along my skin, whispering that I had failed him before the world had. Even the small things, a torn piece of clothing, a flattened patch of grass, a stone that looked like it had been moved, carried enormous weight. I bent over them, fingertips brushing the earth, imagining the weight of him pressing against it, imagining him brushing past, leaving just enough trace to hint at life, but never enough to be certain. My hands shook, my stomach lurched. Every breath tasted like regret. When I closed my eyes, I could see his amber gaze, full of mischief, full of trust, and that vision almost broke me entirely. The forest, once a place of wonder, had transformed into a labyrinth of suspicion, every ridge and hollow a question. I caught myself talking aloud, pleading with the wind, whispering apologies into the darkness as if it could carry my voice to him, wherever he might be. I thought about the night we had camped at Glacier Point months ago. The stars stretched across the sky in infinite constellations, and now the same stars felt indifferent, distant, cold witnesses to our desperation. The longer he remained missing, the more the canyon seemed to twist, a living trap, and I realized I had begun to inhabit a different world. One stitched together by memory, rumor, and fear, where every movement in the trees was proof or threat, and every silence a verdict. Years had passed, but the valley never forgot. The air still carried the scent of pine and stone, the same scent that had followed me the day he vanished, clinging to clothes, boots, and skin like a memory I could not shake. Every path, every ridge, every trickle of a stream seemed loaded with questions I could not answer. The forest had grown wilder, as though it had claimed him for itself, reshaping itself to hide secrets in plain sight. I moved through it differently now, slower, more careful, my eyes scanning for details that might have once seemed insignificant. A flattened patch of grass, a broken branch, the faintest imprint of small boots pressed into mud. Each clue, however slight, sent my pulse thundering, but every discovery dissolved into emptiness before I could grasp it. I had changed too. The guilt had carved lines into my face, sharpened my hands, made my voice softer, more careful around people. Friends drifted away, unable to endure the constant retelling of possibilities and missed signs, leaving me to speak only to those who understood the weight of silence. My parents grew older, their hair silvering, their eyes tired with the effort of holding hope too long. I remembered the way his mother had held my hand in the first week, trembling, searching for a lifeline in someone else's grief. That memory burned with a heat that never faded. I wanted to comfort her, to apologize, to swear that he would return, but the words always stuck somewhere between my lungs and my lips, choking me. Rumors and fleeting reports began to swirl in town. A figure glimpsed on a far ridge, a light in a cave where no light should be, a howl that rolled across the mountains at odd hours. I chased each one, heart leaping and breaking in the same motion, eyes straining to make sense of shadows that danced just beyond reach. My hands often shook as I traced the edges of rocks, imagining him pressed against them, listening, hiding, surviving, knowing and not knowing that someone was searching. Some nights I dreamed of him, his face ghost-like, amber eyes wide, voice trembling with both fear and wonder, and I would wake gasping, drenched in sweat, certain the wind outside my window carried him closer than before. In quiet moments I spoke to him aloud. My voice was a thread, fragile, almost desperate, knitting hope into the cold air of my apartment. "Where are you?" I would whisper, my palms resting on a map I had covered in pins, strings, and circles. "Are you alive? Are you warm? Are you still angry at me for laughing too much, for not paying attention?" The answers never came, only the hum of the city beyond the window, the faint rush of distant traffic, and the memory of Yosemite stretching like a living thing behind my eyes. Each imagined reply weighed heavily, twisting like a vine around my heart, because somewhere, somehow, he might be hearing me, and I could not reach him. I began to notice small signs, almost invisible to anyone else. A pile of stones stacked carefully near a stream, a faint trail leading to an abandoned campsite, the whisper of footsteps over loose leaves at dusk. My imagination filled in the blanks, painting pictures of him building shelters, sharpening stones into tools, tracing the lines of his own path, learning the rhythm of survival. The boy I remembered, laughing and mischievous, had changed into someone else entirely, someone cautious, wary, sculpted by loneliness and necessity. I felt pangs of guilt and awe all at once, mourning the child I had known while marveling at the endurance of the one he had become. Evenings were worst. I would sit by the firelight of my own apartment, maps spread around me, imagining how he moved through the forest, which cliffs he climbed to watch sunsets, which caves he had hidden enduring storms, which streams offered safe water, which branches could hide him from the world. I traced paths with my fingers, imagining every footstep, every fall, every small victory and moment of terror. I spoke into the quiet, calling his name until my throat ached, and sometimes, just sometimes, I thought I heard the faintest echo, a breath that answered me, as if he existed somewhere in that hollow space between memory and possibility. I had grown accustomed to the ache of uncertainty, yet it never dulled. Every story, every sighting, every unverified lead made me feel closer and farther at the same time. I saw him in strangers, in children playing near streams, in shadows that twisted unnaturally under the moonlight. Every fleeting resemblance ripped my heart open and left me raw, forcing me to confront how fragile our lives were, how quickly innocence could vanish into air, stone, and silence. I had learned to move carefully, to watch closely, to notice everything, because 1 second of inattention had been all it took to lose him once, and I could not survive losing him again in my mind. The forest felt different this time, older somehow, the trails twisting like veins through a body that had learned to conceal secrets. I returned to Yosemite alone, boots heavy with expectation, my breath catching in the damp, pine-scented air, every step an attempt to reach him without knowing how. The sun hung low, cutting through the canopy in gold shafts that dusted the forest floor, illuminating patches of moss and rock. And in that light, I imagined him moving, just out of sight, small and wary, learning the rhythm of survival with a patience I could barely comprehend. Every snapped twig, every shift of shadows made my heart leap, a taut string ready to break or sing. He had left traces, subtle but undeniable. A circle of stones forming a crude hearth, soot blackened from fire that had long since died, flattened leaves suggesting someone had lain there in wait or in exhaustion. I crouched, brushing my fingers over the earth, imagining the weight of his small frame pressed against it, the careful placement of each rock, each stick, the conscious effort to remain unseen. The thought of him surviving here alone sharpened a pang of awe and guilt. I had been searching, calling, imagining, and he had been living a life I had barely understood, learning the language of the wilderness in silence. I followed footprints too faint to see clearly, feeling the delicate press of survival in each impression. Moss compressed underfoot, bark scraped along arms, and the forest hummed in response, alive with birds, wind, and the distant rush of water over stone. The boy's presence seemed to hover just beyond perception, a ghost in every dappled ray of sunlight, a shadow that shifted with intent. I imagined him perched high on a ridge, amber eyes wide and scanning, cautious, perhaps curious, perhaps fearful of what or who might emerge. I felt my own chest tighten as if anticipating the reunion, uncertain whether it would be relief or heartbreak. I stumbled upon a small cave, hidden behind a curtain of vines and jagged rock. My heart beat faster. Here was evidence that someone had made this place home. Charred stones from recent fire, a collection of gathered nuts, a journal partially buried in the dirt, edges curled and pages warped by humidity. I lifted it carefully, fingertips brushing over crude sketches of trees, streams, and shapes I could not fully decipher, symbols of a life lived entirely in the rhythm of the forest. His thoughts, coded and fragmented, spoke to resilience, fear, longing, and the constant awareness of the world beyond the trees. Each mark made me ache with admiration and sorrow. He had survived without us, yet every line hinted at loneliness so deep it could hollow a person from within. Night fell quickly, colder than I had anticipated, and I built a small fire outside the cave, the flames throwing flickering light onto rocks and moss. I imagined him watching from the shadows, calculating my intentions, questioning whether to trust the presence that had come seeking him. I spoke softly, whispering apologies, encouragements, fragments of memory, hoping my voice could reach him without startling him into retreat. The wind carried my words into the trees, and I imagined them touching him like a ghostly thread connecting our past to this uncertain present. Hours passed. I moved cautiously around the cave, marking potential escape routes, scanning for evidence of his movements, attuned to every sound. The rustle of leaves, the crack of a twig, the distant howl of a coyote, a bird's sharp cry. Each noise was a riddle, a question, a possibility. I imagined him judging me silently, weighing the intent of my return, evaluating whether the desperation I carried in my voice matched the patience and caution he had honed in isolation. My hands ached from brushing over rocks and roots, from the meticulous care of examining every stone, every footprint, every mark left behind by survival. I paused near a stream that cut through the forest, watching ripples catch the moonlight. I imagined him kneeling there, cupping water in his hands, studying his reflection as if asking, "Who am I now? Who has this place made me?" The thought of his transformation, the boy I remembered, playful and careless, now sharpened by solitude, taught by fear, and hardened by necessity, filled me with both dread and awe. I wanted to call out to bridge the distance, yet feared that a single misplaced sound could send him deeper into hiding. I crouched, holding my breath, imagining him somewhere near, listening, watching, testing the patience and intent of the person who had never stopped searching. I saw him before he saw me, crouched on a narrow ledge near the stream, the moonlight catching the edges of his hair and the sharpness of his eyes. He was smaller than I remembered, leaner, muscles honed by climbing, running, surviving, and every detail, the curve of his shoulder, the set of his jaw, the intensity of his gaze made my chest tighten with a mix of relief and grief. I stepped slowly, careful not to startle him, voice low, almost a whisper. "It's me. I've come back." The words felt fragile, like a thread stretched across an impossible chasm. He froze, body rigid, eyes scanning, calculating, and I understood immediately. He had learned to survive by reading the world, reading people, and now he was reading me. He didn't run, didn't speak, just studied me. There was fear, yes, but also curiosity, suspicion, something I couldn't name, some memory of the past tangled with the stranger he had become. I knelt on the edge of the ledge, not daring to move closer, letting the flickering firelight from my small lantern illuminate nothing but shadows. My hands itched to reach for him, but I held them still, knowing that trust could not be demanded, only earned, and I had no right to his patience. My voice softened, a confession almost. "I never stopped looking for you. Every day I thought about you. I never gave up." He shifted slightly, the first movement that suggested he had heard more than the words themselves. The stream gurgled between us, carrying the sound of our breaths and the night. I imagined the endless nights he had spent alone, listening to the same water, naming each star, counting each shadow, measuring every sound for danger and opportunity. I thought of the cold, the hunger, the isolation, and the resilience he must have carried like armor against a world that had forgotten him. He was not just a boy anymore. He was a force molded by absence, by the wilderness, by silence. I remembered the small things from our past, trying to anchor him with them. How he had laughed at me when I tripped on the first trail, how he had insisted we count the petals of a wildflower together, how he had traced shapes in the clouds. "Do you remember Glacier Point?" I asked, softer still. "The stars stretched so wide, you said they were dragons." His lips twitched, almost a smile, almost recognition, and I felt the first crack in the wall he had built around himself. My chest loosened just enough to allow hope in, cautious, trembling, careful. He finally spoke, a whisper, low and measured. "Why are you here?" The words were simple, yet weighted with everything he had endured, everything he had had to become to survive. I swallowed, voice thick with unspent emotion, "Because I never stopped coming back. Because I need you to know you're not alone anymore." His eyes glimmered in the firelight, sharp, searching, assessing my intent, and I understood that he was no longer a child who would simply run into my arms. He had learned the forest, and now he would test me, measure me, decide if I belonged in his world or if I would disappear like everyone else. The night held us in suspended motion. The wind stirred the pines, carrying whispers that mingled with the gurgle of water and our quiet breaths. I saw his chest rise and fall, saw the tension coiled like a spring beneath his skin, felt the weight of every year of absence pressing between us. I inched closer, slow, deliberate, showing through every movement that I could be trusted, that I had changed as he had, that I understood the cost of fear and survival. He shifted again, just enough to allow me to see the small scars along his hands, the hardened edges of his skin, the evidence of the life he had lived alone. I wanted to reach out to take his hand, but paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the world adjust to the presence of both of us in the same space for the first time in years. Then a small step forward, almost imperceptible, and I mirrored it, slow, patient. Our eyes locked, and for a heartbeat, I saw the boy I had lost, the child who had vanished in sunlight and laughter, and the young survivor he had become. Every memory of him mingled with every new detail of survival, shaping a fragile bridge between past and present. I whispered his name again, a prayer, a promise, and he flinched almost instinctively, then let the tension ease slightly, a quiet acknowledgement that the thread connecting us had not been severed entirely. The night deepened, the stars above us steady and indifferent, and yet in that suspended moment the forest held its breath, as if waiting to see what we would do next, whether trust could be rebuilt, whether the boy who had vanished and the man who had waited for him could exist in the same world once more. The forest seemed to hold its breath as we lingered in the cave's shadow, the moonlight pooling like silver water on the rocks. He finally allowed himself to step closer, but not fully, a careful negotiation of trust that he alone dictated. I felt the years of absence, the silence, the distance, as a living weight pressing between us. Every scar, every hardened edge of muscle, every flicker of amber in his eyes spoke of a life lived in solitary vigilance. I had imagined this moment countless times, but nothing had prepared me for the complexity of it, relief woven with guilt, joy laced with fear, and an ache that cut through all memory of the past. He touched a stone near the fire as if testing it, as if asking silently, "Are you here to destroy or to protect?" I watched him, every subtle movement, every shift in stance, learning again what survival had taught him. "I've brought food," I said softly, setting down a small pack. Nothing extravagant, just enough to show I had thought of him, of what he might need, without assuming comfort could be demanded. His gaze flickered to the pack, then back to me, and for the first time since the forest had swallowed him, I saw him consider me not as the boy I had known, but as someone who might be permitted into his present. We spoke cautiously, words measured, tentative, each sentence a test of boundaries. He asked about the world beyond the trees, the people who had waited, the ones who had never stopped hoping. I described them, not in grandeur but in detail, the small acts of persistence, the hollow spaces of time filled with memory and longing. Each revelation seemed to weigh him, folding grief, curiosity, and disbelief into a fragile mixture that made him retreat and advance in the same breath. He asked questions I could not fully answer, about why I hadn't found him sooner, about whether I truly understood what it meant to survive alone. I admitted that I didn't, but that I had never stopped trying to reach him, that I had never stopped imagining his life, hoping he had stayed alive. The first touch came slowly, almost imperceptibly, a hand brushing mine as he retrieved a small stick to poke at the fire. I flinched, then relaxed, understanding that trust was built in increments measured by him. He allowed me glimpses of his past, stories encoded in sketches, journals, and symbols, little windows into the boy he had been and the young survivor he had become. I followed his cues, listening, absorbing, marveling at the resilience and ingenuity that had kept him alive. Every description of a storm weathered alone, of hunger endured, of nights spent counting stars and shadows, added depth to the image I had carried for years in memory and fear. We moved from the cave to the stream, his lead cautious and deliberate, his movements precise, deliberate, showing the skills honed over years without guidance. I mirrored him, careful not to impose, careful to let him dictate the rhythm. We drank from the stream together, the water cold and sharp, and in the reflected ripples I glimpsed him and me together, past and present overlapping, the gap of 4 years bridged by patience, understanding, and silent acknowledgement. I saw him laugh softly for the first time in years, not the wild, careless laughter of childhood, but a sound shaped by survival, fragile and piercing, and it tore through me with relief and sorrow entwined. When we returned to the small clearing near the cave, the first hints of dawn breaking over the valley, I realized that our journey had shifted. It was no longer about searching or finding. It was about learning to inhabit the same world again, negotiating presence and trust, teaching him that life beyond the forest could be survived just as he had survived here. He looked at me, amber eyes steady, and for a heartbeat the weight of all the years, all the fears, all the losses hung between us, dense as stone, then lifted slightly, replaced with the possibility of understanding. We sat by the dying fire, sharing what little we had brought, and he asked quietly, almost shyly, about my life in his absence. I told him, careful not to overwhelm, careful to honor the world he had created in solitude. And in that exchange, I saw the first glimmer of something I had longed for. Not a return to childhood, not a reversion to innocence, but a tentative bridge. A shared world where he could exist fully, resilient and cautious, and I could exist as someone who had never stopped believing in him. The forest, the stream, the stones and shadows, all bore witness, indifferent yet present, holding the memory of everything that had transpired and waiting, as always, to see what we would do with the second chance we had been given.